Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor John Wickoffers has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brief overview on the Manhattan Project and its impact on civilization. The fact is that there has been an enormous amount of work, some of it excellent scholarly work, um, some of it investigative work, discovering all sorts of uh, secrets, let's say, because the Manhattan Project was a top secret project that very few people, even within the project of the more than 500,000 who worked on it, actually knew what the overall goal of this project was about. That was headed by Robert Oppenheimer, of course, the famous physicist, about whom there have been many books as well as even motion pictures, of course. The goal of the video that I invite all of you to take a look at is to examine the legacy of the Manhattan Project um, and the impact of the Manhattan Project on contemporary civilization on a world scale. Obviously, there are those who maintain that the Manhattan Project ushered in the nuclear age, and obviously it did, and it had an impact in science and technology and engineering um, in all domains, from nuclear medicine to agriculture to water purification to obviously nuclear energy. However, it also has resulted in the current existence of 13,000 warheads, which are far more than needed to blow up this entire planet and end life on this end life on Earth. Okay, so the question is weighing the positives and the negatives um, for civilization resulting from the Manhattan Project. The Nobel Prize for Peace this year, 2024, went to an anti nuclear organization in Japan called Nihon Hindakyo. And this organization, in accepting the Nobel Prize for Peace, noted obviously the tragedy of the atomic bomb used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th, 1945, respectively. Uh, but it also, by the way, noted that there is a current crisis taking place in the Middle East. Specifically, they mentioned the tragedy in Gaza of mass civilian deaths and injuries. The organization is also well aware that Israel and its major sponsors in the West, especially the United States, are part of the nuclear club. They have nuclear warheads. And they are also aware that there is a possibility, there's always a possibility, given that we have 13,000 warheads and Most of those, around 10,000 of those, are in the hands, a bit more than that, of Russia and the US, by the way. There is a possibility of nuclear winter. So the Nobel Prize for Peace to this group is one reason to step back and take a look at the Manhattan Project's legacy and civilization. Another reason, of course, and this is why the Nobel Prize, the committee awarded the prize specifically this year to this group in Japan. Another reason is because of the two wars taking place simultaneously, one in Ukraine and the other in the Middle East, in Israel. And the talk, a great deal of talk, openly, publicly discussing the possibility of the use of nuclear warheads. I want to point out that the Manhattan Project origin, the Manhattan Project's origin, was back in the 1930s during the Third Reich, when Adolf Hitler had, after he realized Anschluss, in fact, in 1938, with the announcement of Anschluss, which is the unity of Austria and Germany, basically he annexed Austria, and then planning to move east, that is Poland, and planning for a larger war, because he had as a core value in his foreign policy the German concept of Lebensraum, which means living space, acquiring land at the expense of people who were already there on it, right? People who lived there. Scientists discovered that, namely, two specific ones, two big names that actually wrote a letter to President Roosevelt, namely Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard, both, of course, European physicists. They um, wrote to Roosevelt that the Third Reich had scientists who had successfully managed to test nuclear fission, which accounts for the explosion of the bomb, and that the this was alarming, and Roosevelt took that to heart, and he ordered, by 1940, the Army Corps of Engineers in New York to start putting the infrastructure together for what would become the Manhattan Project by 1942. By the time Robert Oppenheimer is chosen by the U.S. government, by the most brilliant physicist in this domain, to lead the Manhattan Project. This was a vast project in a number of areas, not just out of Columbia University in New York, but the University of Chicago, where Enrico Fermi, of course, worked. Another brilliant Italian physicist worked in that project. Los Alamos, New Mexico, a number of other places, including Oak Ridge, Tennessee, as well as Washington State. So there were a number of areas where they dispersed and worked on this project. And like I said, by the way, very few people knew what this was all about. This was kept top secret. The question, of course, is when the bomb was dropped, we all know that Robert Oppenheimer reverted to Hindu philosophy, Hindu religion, and the Bhagavad Gita about mass destruction and death. And he went to Albert Einstein and basically explained to Einstein that he was seriously concerned. Now, both Einstein and Oppenheimer, as well as Leo Szilard, by the way, there were all these people were essentially, after they saw what they did with the first test of the once the bomb was tested, they were alarmed. And this was a weapon to be used on civilians, by the way. No matter what the rhetoric, this was a weapon to be used on civilians. And it was. It was used on civilians. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, obviously with the pretext that there were military presence there, of course there were, and there were military headquarters in Nagasaki and so forth. But the fact is, the bomb was used, and once it was used, that set a precedent. That was the beginning of the nuclear arms race, which, of course, follows throughout the Cold War. So, one of the legacies of the Manhattan Project is the nuclear arms race. That's the most obvious legacy. And the world living in fear of nuclear winter. And once in a while, from the 1950s, I believe 56, 57 were some very tense years between Russia, the Soviet Union and the United States, then 61, 62. Then during the Reagan period, in the early Reagan years, when they were talking about limited nuclear warfare, using tactical nuclear weapons in Europe, and the Europeans were alarmed, obviously, for, for the right reasons. So what we have here is a situation where the nuclear arms race unleashes the potential for mass destruction. Now, it's true that apologists argue we have to look at the bright side of all this, of the nuclear arms race, nuclear energy, nuclear science, everything from medical applications, like I said, the water purification application in agriculture, and all kinds of uses from photography and engineering and so forth, where it has a positive impact. All that is impact. All that is true. Um, it is also true that humanity, 8 billion people, not to mention the rest of life on the planet, by the way, uh, is at risk in case of a nuclear accident leading to a mass scale nuclear war and the end of life on the planet. I want to invite you to take a look at this video that is details some highlights of the Manhattan Project's legacy on civilization. This is especially significant today because both China and Russia have red lines on when they're going to use nuclear weapons. And they have made no secret of it. In fact, Russia has repeatedly used the rhetoric about nuclear weapons, using nuclear weapons, in case the US NATO led group crosses certain lines and threatens the national security interests and sovereignty of Russia. Now, there are those in the West who argue that he's just bluffing. Putin is just bluffing. Maybe he is. The question is it worth to test the bluff? Is it worth to test the bluff? The other issue here is China. China is not backing down on two issues, Taiwan and the South China Sea. They're not going to back down on those. Just as the US would not back down if China militarized to the teeth Mexico or Canada and aimed to undermine the national security interests of the United States in North America. So the fact is that both China and Russia uh, are on record of doing what they must, okay, including use of nuclear weapons, if they decide that their national security interests are threatened. And that is the key because this is a human element. This is a human element. How do you decide? How does one decide? And what about a nuclear accident? What about things getting out of hand by accident? Um, that's this is a very, very important issue. This is not to mention the fact that it takes anywhere from 10,000 to 24,000 years for nuclear waste to decompose, to decay, basically, and not be harmful. So storing nuclear waste is another issue, by the way. Storing nuclear waste is another issue because theoretically, by the way, nuclear weapons are made not to be used. They're made as a deterrent to deter the other side. So you have it, so the other side is going to back down. Except when the other side is Russia, which has more nuclear warheads than any other country in the world, including the United States, by the way, or China, which has Russia on its back, which has Russia backing it, by the way, because he has a strategic alliance with Russia, and it says, okay, here's the red line. You cross it, we use nuclear weapons. So the question is, are the risks worth testing the other side, testing the will, the resolve of the other side? I thank you for listening to this. I invite you to take a look at the longer video. And I want to extend an invitation to all of you to join this channel, this YouTube channel, which Asad Alim, my very good friend, manages. It's an educational channel. And I look forward to your comments and your questions. Thank you.